I was still trying to decide what to do this diatribe about on Tuesday morning when I opened up my inbox, and there at the top sat two consecutive emails that, when taken in tandem, handed me the subject on a platter. The first one was from a blogger who's trying to compile another one of those, X number of arguments that Christians need to stop using lists. And her angle was to reach out to a number of different, bloggers, podcasters, and YouTube personalities to get their nominations. Now, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a big fan of those lists because if God exists isn't at the top of the list, what's the point? And honestly, I don't want to give people who are wrong any advice on how to argue better. I mean, if a theist asks me for advice, I'm tempted to say, no, stick with the why are there still monkeys thing. We laugh at you at the time, sure, but in private, we really struggle with that one. But I'm going to go against my instinct here and offer one piece of advice to all the theist debaters that listen to this show, so nobody. And it was prompted by the second email, which came from a very patient gentleman by the name of Zikri. Now, Zikri and I have been emailing back and forth for the better part of a year at this point. He's a Muslim guy that lives Google knows where, who found something I wrote on the blog years ago that he took issue with, and he emailed me about it last September. Now, we've been going back and forth, and we're making progress. After only 8 months, he's realized that saying, I haven't given up on you yet is insulting as fuck. But he hasn't given up on me. He's absolutely convinced that by the time I'm done reading the Quran, I'll give up on the whole atheism thing and turn to Allah. After all, how could anybody possibly deny the truth of the Quran when they read it with their own eyes? How could anybody possibly deny the deep insights into human psychology that Muhammad offers? How could anyone possibly deny the scientific foreknowledge that Muhammad exhibits over and over again in its pages? Well, I'm learning exactly how to do that, and I'm sharing it with Zikri along the way. And bless his little heart, he just won't give up. I will. I have. I'm just stringing him along at this point as an anthropological experiment. But every couple of weeks, he reads another thing on some dumbass Islamic science blog, and he's certain that I'm going to be unable to refute it, so he sends it along. And every one of them is more laughable than the last. Now, he's been on a waves beneath the waves kick lately, and it's so silly that it's kind of crept up into the show a couple of times in the last few months. But if you're not familiar with the argument, and why would you be, it goes like this. At some point in the Quran, Muhammad makes reference to the waves beneath the waves and the waves beneath them, or something like that. And according to Zikri, oceanographers have recently discovered that there are 3 layers of independent waves in the ocean, like waves of a more saline water or water of a different temperature or something like that, upon which other layers of water sits, or something. And the fact that there are 3 layers, and Muhammad referenced 3 layers, that's undeniable proof that this information was coming from an all-knowing being, or at least one that knew way more than any human alive when the Quran was written. Now, I don't know if any of his oceanographic claims are true. Fact-checking every theist that sends me proof of the divine would be a full-time job, and most of the time you don't need to know the facts surrounding the argument to refute it. Like, in this instance, for example, the argument itself is so unsound that even if we grant all the claims that Zikri is making, it still crumbles under the weight of the tiniest dollop of critical thought. So after the umpteenth link he sends me to prove the waves beneath the waves shit, I wrote back a response and sent it to both Zikri and the blogger who wanted my nomination for arguments that religious people need to stop using. I tweaked it a bit for each recipient, but basically my point in both of them boiled down to this. Just reverse your argument and ask if it would convince you. I asked Zikri to imagine that a new discovery comes along, completely disproves this concept of the tri-layered ocean, and 100% of oceanographers come to accept that there were no waves beneath the waves, or that there are 4 layers or 8 layers or something like that. Would you stop believing in the Quran then? Would you say to yourself, well, clearly Muhammad didn't know his shit about, wave layers, so the rest of this is probably bullshit too. And if you wouldn't, why the fuck do you think this is going to convince anybody else? If the same argument with completely opposite assumptions doesn't disprove your argument, why would you even bring it up? And with apologies to the longtime listeners that are saying, hey, didn't you just bring this up in the diatribe for episode 4? I want to note that this strategy deflates almost every theistic argument. And it usually shortens them too, because as often as not, the assumption the theist is starting with are actually the opposite of the correct ones, right? So if you ask for a commitment from the person that you're debating, if you say, okay, but if I can disprove all the assumptions you went into this argument with, will you admit that the only logical conclusion is that God doesn't exist? And if they're unwilling to make that concession, and trust me they are, you've already proven that A, their argument is unconvincing, and or B, they're not engaged in a sincere debate. So that's my advice to Christian debaters and religious debaters in general, even those on the atheistic side. Before you offer the argument, reverse it and ask yourself if you find it convincing. If not, scrap it and find another argument. And the beauty of this strategy is that if the theists adopt it, it's not going to lead to them arguing better. It's just going to lead to them arguing less.